Everyone, welcome to the Movie Session Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to talk about this new movie that just came out on Prime Video called Roadhouse. Now, I actually got to see it this past weekend, and I really want to talk about it, so let's get right down into it. Before even talking about this, let me just say this, right? This movie does star Jake Gyllenhaal. It is directed by Doug Liman. In terms of Jake Gyllenhaal, I'm a massive fan of his. I mean, he's a really talented actor. I remember watching him in movies like Donnie Darko, Zodiac. I think his best performance, of course, is Nightcrawler. I think that's one of his best roles out there. I mean, he's a really talented actor. He's someone who's really committed to just about any role that he takes in. So the fact that he was actually doing a Roadhouse movie was very intriguing because he's not necessarily like your action type of guy. I don't think he doesn't really do a lot of action movies in general. I mean, yes, he was in Spider-Man Far From Home. He played Mysterio and he had like a villainous role, but typically speaking, he doesn't have, like, he's not someone who's always going to be in action movies. So when I heard the fact that he was going to be making this movie, like behind the scenes stuff were coming out, like the fact that there was that footage of him at the UFC, that started to spark a whole, discussion about this movie. That was already just the beginnings of its promotion, and I was very intrigued. I was like, okay, this is very interesting. I mean, he's done something like this before, like where his character is very involved in like some sort of martial arts or some sort of fighting sort of movie, like with Southpaw, for instance. So I was like, okay, I'm getting a vibe, but this is somewhere along that line. But of course, because this is also based on a retelling of the original 1989 movie starring Patrick Swayze, that I was like, okay, this is very interesting. Like this is going to be a different type of, this is not a different type of movie, of course, this is basically a remake of Roadhouse from 1989 with Patrick Swayze, but also the sense that we're now seeing Jake Gyllenhaal giving his own redemption of his character in this more modern take. So, and of course, when the trailers came out, I mean, it looked pretty intriguing, although I would say that I still want to open my mind and kind of see the actual final movie and give my thoughts about it. But yeah, the movie is now out. Even though I have not seen the original 1989 version, I intended to, but I just never got the chance. For me, what does matter is the fact that it's not just a comparison. It's not just a movie that it basically retells everything from the original version. I do think that even when there is a remake, even when there is a retelling of a story, that it is very important that even that own remake tries its best to still have its own identity. So that was really the most important thing about it. So regardless of that, like, I'm not going to do any comparisons, but that was something, like, even if I had watched it, I would still would have preferred to see like the movie making its own kind of legacy, its own kind of story. So of that aside, right? So I have now seen the movie, of course. I've seen it, I've processed it, and let's just say this, right? As much as the fact that, you have a great director like Doug Liman involved in this project, much as the fact that you've got a great actor like Jake Gyllenhaal involved in this project, I was not a big fan of Roadhouse. I was not a big fan of Roadhouse. I was just not a big fan. Let's just say that I was very underwhelmed watching this movie. The story was pretty bland. For one thing, like the story, like it really tries, like for something like this that's supposed to be like an action movie, I was expecting it to be very entertaining and very action packed. And it's not to say that there wasn't really action. There's a lot of fight sequences in this movie, which is totally fine. I was just not expecting the story, like the whole movie itself, to be so bland, so enthusiastic. It felt like there wasn't a lot of charm to it. That's what really surprised me watching this whole film. I was like, wow, I was expecting a little bit more out of this movie to be a bit more exciting because of the fact that this is Roadhouse, because of the fact that we've been hearing so much about it, the fact that Jake Gyllenhaal's involved, that, okay, well, if we're going to be seeing this movie, like, I'm expecting some really, some quality stuff out of it. It doesn't have to be an Oscar, worthy screenplay or anything like that. I mean, this is going to be an action movie. This is not going to be like, oh, it has to be so in-depth, it has to be substantial, or it has to be layered. It doesn't have to be any of that, but it has to be entertaining enough that it will capture my attention. And it was really tough having to watch this movie because as the story was progressing, I could care really less about it. One thing being that, the characters, like, I didn't really care for much of the characters, especially, let me just say this. As I said, I love Jake Gyllenhaal. I think he is really good at just about grabbing any character and trying to portray them in any way possible. I feel like this was a really big miss for him. like, which is really rare. This is really weird to say. I mean, that's not to say that he hasn't had any misses before in the past. Nodding to Prince of Persia, but this, I don't know. It just, with this role, I was expecting so much. I was like, oh man, this is gonna be a really interesting character. If Jake's gonna be playing it, like there must be something very interesting about him. But to be honest, I felt like his character was super muted. He was just super, like, he always had like the same facial expression, like just looking around, staring, just giving that glare. But like there wasn't really anything about him that made me just go, wow, he is so like interesting as a character. I was expecting him to at least be, you know, intimidating. And even then, when he tries to be intimidating, I wasn't getting that vibe out of Gyllenhaal. So it's like, this is kind of going off on Gyllenhaal's ability as playing this character more so than issues with like the writing, thing like that. But also it's the fact that, let me just say that it just, on top of the fact that he wasn't really intimidating, but he lacks the charm. And I feel like the fact that he had there's no charm to this character, that it just really made it tough to even follow this character, let alone the fact that the actual story itself was already tough to get through. And so because of just like this big sequence right there, where it's like, well, if this movie's going to be, you know, it's going to have some issues, at least the one redeeming factor should be the main character. And unfortunately, Jake Gyllenhaal's portrayal as Dalton just did not really cut out. Like, it just was really disappointing. I was just kind of like, there's just nothing about this character that I really liked. And I know there is instances where in the movie they do try to allude to this darkness of his character, which is totally fine. Like, I got the sense that there's a bit of this darkness. There's something that's really kind of, you know, bothering him. The fact that, you know, he has something within him that he doesn't want to, you know, release to the world, because of the fact that he knows that something like that's going to destroy him, which is totally fine by me. But I just felt like the execution just didn't really work out. Like, again, the fact that the character itself wasn't someone who I was able to really relate to, or really able to at least find some charming aspects about him. I think that's what really made this movie so tough. Let alone the fact that there's other issues with this movie. Like, for one thing, I hate to say this, but the acting was not the greatest by basically everyone in this movie. Like, there are definitely some areas where like there were some really cringy moments. Conor McGregor. Let me just say this, at least with Conor McGregor, like, I will say this, okay? Even though the fact that this movie was super boring and it was super tough to get through, there is one sequence like midway through the movie where there is that entrance for Conor McGregor's character Knox, and I would say that was probably the first time, like first ever moment in the movie where I felt like, oh wow, I'm actually like interested now. Like, it was a very bizarre, very psychotic moment. Like, it got the idea, okay, this is Conor McGregor's character. We're starting to get the sense of who this antagonistic character is. And it's like, okay, I'm very intrigued. But then all that fell apart. Like, once we start to see more of Conor McGregor in this movie, like he definitely cannot act. Let's just say, and not just that, but like, I don't even know what to say. Like, there were moments in the movie I was just really questioning a lot of things. Like, the fact that he could not really walk properly. Like, he was always like this, like he was always walking like this, and I'm just kind of like, okay, the normal people don't walk like that. Like, do you have something in your butt that's making it hard for you to actually walk properly or something? It was a really bizarre thing to see coming from Conor McGregor's performance right there. I mean, again, I'm not expecting any Oscar-worthy performance here, but it was just not the greatest. I mean, you have the Irish stereotypes, of course, stereotyping, of course, and then just the way he's delivering some of the lines, it was just kind of like, okay. But I mean, so his performance, of course, was not that great. But even from the remaining cast, like, I just wasn't really digging it. Like, even with some of the other cast members, some of the performances just felt pretty forced. It was pretty cringy at times. I will say, if there's one person who I really thought was like, oh man, I actually like this, I can't remember the actor's name, but I think his character was like Luis. He was like one of the biker gangs who, you know, would give some of the commentary or try to correct his boss. He was actually one of the only characters who I actually felt like, oh wow, he's great, because he has really great comic relief. So he was like the one part of the film that I was like, okay, this is actually a very interesting person. I wish we could have seen more of him, but he was probably like the one positive thing about this movie. What else? The line delivery was not the greatest. I feel like there were, now that's not to say that, you know, it was so bad that I literally wanted to cover my ears or anything like that. But there were definitely moments in the movie where some of the dialogue was just cringy. I was kind of giving like those frowny faces. I was like, really? Did you really just say that? So some of the line delivery was pretty off. The antagonist, I already said just earlier, like Knox. I mean, Conor McGregor's Knox. I mean, like, I don't know what else to say about that. But also with Billy Magnussen's character, like, Billy Magnussen does his best to try and give something out of this character, but he is such a generic villain. We don't really get to know too much about him. Like, we get some details about, you know, some soft details about who this character is, what association is, what his history is, and we get that his father is somehow involved in like the drug world or cartel world, which is like, okay, I get that. But then they just really brush aside that and never really go deep into it. And then it's just like, they never really get back to anything regarding his family, the business, as well as the fact that his father, because I mean, there's an actual connection between his father and Knox, and that just, and then once you see the ending, things don't really make any sense. So lots of questionable things from this movie in terms of like the story, the villains, line delivery, the acting. But yeah, I mean, this is a film that I really, really wanted to like, just because I've heard so much about the original 1989 version. Like, it's not, I mean, I've heard it's not like the greatest thing, but I've heard that's really entertaining. It has its, you know, classic vibes to it. It remains to be a classic to a lot of people. And I was really interested to see, okay, well, I'm not going to have a chance to see this, but I do hope that this one is at least as good as the original. But this one just did not really capture my attention. It just really bummed me just how boring and bland a lot of the whole, you know, movie was. The characters I could really care about. I could care less about, sorry. The story was just something that I wasn't really interested in. It just never really picked up. And even when we do get some of the fight sequences, they're all right. I mean, there was some pretty good choreography here and there. I think we had two major ones, especially ones with Conor McGregor, which I will say, like, those are some of the more positive bits. But even with the fight sequences, that doesn't really redeem the fact that this movie was just poorly made, poorly executed. I just wish that it could have been done better. I think that the problem really relies on the fact that when you have a hero, or at least in this case, like your typical hero like Dalton, he's supposed to be the one who, you know, you follow this journey through, and he's the one who is taking you on this journey, making you try to kind of capture your attention, trying to get your heart, see the charm out of this character, and see his journey through all of this. And I just felt like it was really disconnected. A lot of it felt flat. And it just never reached to a point where it's like, well, I'm following this character, and I just never felt an ounce where I really cared about him. So unfortunately, I was not a big fan of Roadhouse. I'm really disappointed in it. That's not to say it's like super terrible or anything like that, or it's like one of the worst movies I've seen, but for everything that was being hyped behind this movie, the fact that even the director was like boycotting this movie, not going to theaters because of the fact that it was exclusively on streaming. I mean, even if this was in theaters, like, I still would have seen it in theaters, but it's just like, I would have expected better. If we're going to have all this hassle, if we're going to have all this controversy, I would at least hope that it's a good movie, at least a good, entertaining popcorn flick film. And I just never really got that. And it really disappoints me. It disappoints me that I have to even say this about Jake Gyllenhaal, because I feel like, again, as I said, he's a really talented actor. I felt like, you know, this is a very different role for him, of course, that, you know, maybe this could be a case to show that he could maybe become, you know, an action star himself. But this one, I was just really underwhelmed. Like, even with his portrayal, I just felt like he just never really showed that charm of his character, and it just never really convinced me that he is best to play a character like Dalton. Maybe, again, that's just how I feel, but I just felt like there was that disconnect, and I wish there could have been better things out of this movie, especially even from Jake Gyllenhaal. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say about Roadhouse right there. I was not the biggest fan of it. I wish it could have been better. I will see the 1989 version, see how that one goes. Maybe the Patrick Swayze one is much better in its own regards into how Patrick Swayze himself really plays out his character. But yeah, I was not a big fan of it, unfortunately. But that's just me, right? What are your thoughts if you have seen Roadhouse? Did you like it? Did you not like it? If you did like it, what did you like about that movie? Maybe I'm just not seeing it. If you have seen the original film as well, how do you think that compares to the original one? Like, do things better? It's worse? Yada yada. Do you think this movie should have been in theaters the way, you know, that Doug Liman was basically boycotting this movie? Or maybe it was best to put it on streaming? And let me know if you have any thoughts about this movie in general. Let me know your thoughts below. Make sure to like and subscribe.